She was 34 and invisible at work until she discovered her body was her greatest weapon. I used to think I knew exactly who I was. Victoria Newman, 34 years old, finance department at Meridian Holdings, wife to a man who lived in Houston for 8 months of the year, mother to a 3-year-old boy who laughed like sunshine and slept like a dream. Ordinary, completely, unremarkably ordinary. That was the story I told myself every morning as I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my apartment on Caldwell Street, applying the same drugstore foundation I'd used for a decade, pulling my dark hair into the same sensible low bun, sliding into the same mid-range blazer that could have come from any department store in any American city. I was a background character in my own life, a supporting actress in someone else's highlight reel. My husband, Michael, worked in oil and gas logistics down in Houston. Good man, steady pay. We had met at a friend's barbecue 6 years ago, and there had been a gentle electricity between us. Then nothing dramatic, nothing that set off fireworks, but something warm and reliable, like a fireplace on low heat. We got married after 14 months. I was 28, he was 31, and we both understood that love, at our age, was less about passion and more about partnership, about building something stable, about not dying alone. The first 2 years of our marriage were fine, good even. We bought the apartment. We talked about children. When I got pregnant at 30, we were both delighted in that quiet, responsible way that characterized everything about us. There was no dramatic announcement, no tears of joy, just a conversation at the kitchen table, both of us looking at the positive test, both of us nodding slowly and saying, "Okay, let's do this." Michael was promoted to a regional manager position in Houston when I was 7 months pregnant. The promotion came with a salary bump that made sense for our family, and the assignment was supposed to last 18 months. That was 4 years ago. Now he flies back every 5 or 6 weeks for a long weekend, and we text every day about our son, about grocery lists, about the mundane logistics of a life shared across distance. The intimacy between us has faded into something comfortable and strange, like a favorite sweater that has lost its shape but is still warm. After I gave birth to little Oliver, my body changed in ways I hadn't expected. I had always been slender, almost boyish in my frame, narrow hips, small chest, the kind of figure that slid easily into professional clothes and disappeared in crowds. But breastfeeding, weaning, and the slow march of my 30s reshaped me into someone different. My hips widened, my breasts grew fuller, heavier, sitting higher on my chest with a curve I barely recognized. My waist thickened just slightly, just enough to create an hourglass shape that I hadn't had before. I went from a size 4 to a size 8, and for the first time in my life, I had a figure that announced itself when I walked into a room. At first, I hated it. I mourned my old body the way you mourn a lost friend. I bought loose blazers and empire waist dresses that hid my new curves. I told myself that this was what motherhood did. It changed you, reshaped you, took the woman you used to be and deposited someone new in her place. I was still Victoria, still the same steady, practical woman who color-coded her spreadsheets and showed up to work 15 minutes early and never, ever made a scene. But then something strange began to happen. Men started looking at me, not the polite, dismissive glance that a man gives a woman he is categorized as not his type. Real looks. Prolonged, appreciative, hungry looks. The man at the coffee shop on Morrison Avenue held the door for me and let his eyes travel slowly down my figure before meeting my gaze with a smile that said he liked what he saw. The new account manager at work, a handsome young thing named Derek, who couldn't have been older than 27, started finding excuses to walk past my desk, to lean against my cubicle wall, to ask me questions about line items in budgets that he could have easily looked up himself. One afternoon, I caught him staring at my chest when I leaned over to plug in my phone, and instead of feeling offended, I felt something warm and unfamiliar bloom in the pit of my stomach. Curiosity, I told myself. That's all it was. Just curiosity about this new body I was learning to inhabit. The first affair was with Derek Holbrook, 27, newly divorced, handsome in that carefully curated way that men in their 20s have perfected expensive haircuts, designer stubble, cologne that smelled like cedar and black pepper. He worked in procurement, which meant he was always floating between departments with expense reports and vendor contracts, always finding reasons to interrupt my workflow with a smile and a question. It started, as these things do, with plausible deniability. He brought me coffee from the cafe on the second floor. Tall latte, extra shot, no sugar, because, he said, he'd noticed I always drank it black and figured I was the kind of woman who didn't need her coffee dressed up. I laughed and told him he was observant, and he leaned against my desk and said, "Only when it comes to the things that matter." I should have shut it down right there. I should have smiled politely, turned back to my monitor, and gone on with my day. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the flutter of something I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. "You're very charming, Derek," I said, "but I'm married." "I know," he said. He didn't move. "Doesn't mean I can't notice you." That night, I lay in bed next to my sleeping son in his crib a few feet away, and I stared at the ceiling and told myself it meant nothing, just banter, just the harmless flirtation that happens in every office in America. But my hand drifted to my breast fuller now, aching slightly with the phantom memory of nursing, and I felt a heat that had nothing to do with the thermostat. Derek was young. Derek was fun. Derek made me feel like the woman I used to see in movies, desirable, interesting, alive in a way that my marriage hadn't made me feel in years. We began eating lunch together in the break room, and he started giving me small gifts, a nice pen from the downtown boutique, a scarf that he said reminded him of my eyes. I told myself these were just friendly gestures, just a younger colleague being kind to an older co-worker. But then he started giving me money. Not much at first. A few $100s here and there, a bonus, he said, from some procurement saving he'd engineered that my department had benefited from. I should have questioned it. I should have run the numbers myself to see where it came from. But I was living in a fog of secret attention, of stolen lunches and lingering glances, and the money felt like proof that I mattered to someone, that I was worth something beyond my ability to balance a ledger. The gifts escalated. A designer handbag that appeared in my desk drawer with a note that said, "For the woman who makes every room brighter." A weekend stay at a boutique hotel in Savannah, all expenses paid, a room with a view of the river, where Derek met me at the door with a dozen roses and a look in his eyes that made my breath catch. I told myself it was wrong. I told myself I was a wife, a mother, a professional woman with a career and a reputation. But Derek touched my face that night in the hotel room, and I let him, and the guilt I expected to feel afterward never materialized. Instead, I felt something I could only describe as reawakening. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. That was the beginning of a 4-month entanglement that I knew was unsustainable but couldn't bring myself to end. Derek was attentive in the way that young lovers are, all intensity and discovery, desperate to explore every curve and confession. He made me feel beautiful in a way I hadn't felt since before Oliver was born, since before my body became this new and unfamiliar landscape. He told me I was unlike any woman he'd ever known, that my mind fascinated him as much as my body, that he wanted to know every thought I'd ever had, and I, pathetic and lonely in my marriage that had calcified into routine, believed every word. But Derek wasn't the only one who noticed me. There was also Tyler Marsh, 24, a junior analyst in my department who had been hired straight out of state college with a degree in finance and a face that belonged on a Korean drama, sharp cheekbones, big dark eyes, a jawline that could cut glass. He was the kind of young man that women in their 20s would have fought over. And here he was, sitting 3 desks away from me, typing his spreadsheets with those long fingers, and occasionally glancing up at me with an expression that seemed to hold both admiration and something darker, more desperate. Tyler confessed to me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was working late on the quarterly projections, the office nearly empty, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in that way that makes everything feel slightly unreal. Tyler appeared at the edge of my cubicle, leaning against the partition with his arms crossed, watching me with those dark eyes until I looked up and asked if he needed something. "Victoria," he said. "Just my name, no title, no prefix, just Victoria, spoken like it meant something sacred." "Tyler," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. "It's almost 7. Shouldn't you be heading home?" I tried, he said. "But I can't stop thinking about you." I should have laughed it off. I should have reminded him that I was 10 years older than him, that I had a husband and a child, that whatever he thought he was feeling was just a crush that would pass. Instead, I sat very still and let his words hang in the air between us, feeling the weight of being wanted by someone so young, so unspoiled by the disappointments of life. "Tyler," I said slowly, "you're a sweet kid, but you're 24. I'm 34. I'm married. This isn't—" "I know what I know," he interrupted. He stepped closer. "I know you're not happy. I see the way you look at that phone when your husband texts you. I see the way you sit at your desk and stare out the window like you're somewhere else entirely. I see you, Victoria, the real you. And I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you how I feel." I sent him home. I finished my projections. I went home to my apartment and cooked dinner for Oliver and myself, and put him to bed, and sat on the couch watching late-night television without really seeing it. But Tyler's words echoed in my head like a song I couldn't shake. "I see you, the real you." Did anyone else see me? Really see me? Derek saw me, in his way. But Derek saw the version of me that he wanted to see, the attractive older woman, the forbidden fruit, the secret he could keep and treasure. Tyler saw me differently. Tyler saw someone lost, someone caged, someone who had settled for a life that was safe and stable and slowly suffocating her. I didn't know which vision was more dangerous. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance. Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. The truth was, I had stopped being happy long before Derek, long before Tyler. I had stopped being happy the day I realized that my marriage had become a business arrangement, 2 people sharing a home and a child and a set of financial obligations, with very little left of the warmth that had originally brought them together. Michael was a good man, a responsible man. He sent money home every pay period. He called on Sundays. He flew back for Oliver's birthday and Christmas and the occasional long weekend. But he didn't touch me anymore. Not the way a husband should touch his wife. Not with hunger or urgency or even tenderness. We had become roommates, co-parents, 2 people sharing a life, because the alternative was too complicated to contemplate. I tried, in those early years, to bridge the distance. I sent him photos of Oliver's first steps, his first words, his first day of preschool. I planned weekend trips to Houston to visit him, booking hotels and making restaurant reservations and buying new lingerie that I hoped would rekindle something between us. But Michael was always tired, always busy with work, always just slightly distracted by something that felt more urgent than me. Eventually, I stopped trying. I redirected my energy into my job, into my son, into the quiet satisfaction of being competent and professional and needed by no one in particular. And then my body changed, and men started looking. I don't know when the shift happened, when I went from being Victoria Newman, the invisible finance professional, to being Victoria Newman, the woman with the curvy figure and the hungry eyes and the slow-burning hunger for something more. But somewhere between Derek's first coffee and Tyler's confession and the slow erosion of my marriage, I had become someone different, someone who stood in front of the mirror and liked what she saw, someone who dressed for herself now, not for Michael, choosing blouses that hugged her new curves and pencil skirts that emphasized the waist-to-hip ratio that had somehow become her most valuable asset, someone who looked at her reflection and thought, yes, I am still a woman, I am still desirable, I am still alive. But was I? Really? I had become a woman who measured her worth in the eyes of men, who got dressed in the morning with one question foremost in her mind: who will notice me today? I had become a woman who flirted with a 27-year-old colleague and let him give her money and gifts and attention because her husband was too busy 1,400 miles away to remember she had a body at all. I had become a woman who was being confessed to by a 24-year-old boy at 7 p.m. in an empty office, and instead of shutting it down, she had let his words sink into her like rain into parched earth. What was happening to me? Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. The VP changed everything. His name was Nathan Reed, 41 years old, Vice President of Operations at Meridian Holdings, which meant he oversaw every department except the one the CEO personally managed, a sprawling kingdom of spreadsheets and deadlines and personnel decisions that gave him power over nearly 300 employees. He was handsome, in the way that powerful men often are, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from something durable. He dressed impeccably, always in a custom suit from a tailor downtown, always with a watch that cost more than my car. Women looked at him. Men looked at him too, but with a different kind of envy, the kind that comes from knowing you will never be that composed, that commanding, that successful. But Nathan Reed had a reputation. It wasn't a secret. Everyone in the office knew. The women in HR had learned to route complaints about him to a senior director rather than directly to him, because nothing ever came of accusations that involved the vice president's personal relationships with staff. There were rumors never confirmed, always whispered about affairs with subordinates, about extramarital relationships with women from partner companies, about a lifestyle that involved beautiful women and expensive dinners, and a willingness to use his power to get what he wanted. He was known to be greedy for money and women, both equally, without apology. I had seen Nathan Reed at company meetings, at the annual holiday party, at the occasional cross-departmental retreat where he mingled with employees in a way that was supposed to make him seem approachable, but only succeeded in making everyone more nervous. He had never looked at me. Not once. I was beneath his notice, another middle-aged professional in a sensible blazer, doing my job, keeping my head down, contributing to the corporate machine without ever standing out in any memorable way. But that was before my body changed, before Derek, before Tyler, before I learned that my curves could open doors that my competence never could. The thought came to me slowly, like a splinter working its way to the surface of skin. It was an evening in late October. I was sitting at my desk, staring at the quarterly numbers that refused to add up the way they should, when Nathan Reed walked past my cubicle on his way to the executive floor. He didn't stop, didn't even glance in my direction, but I watched him go, the confident stride, the broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, the easy way he carried himself like a man who had never doubted his place in the world, and I felt something sharp and hot flare in my chest. I wanted him to look at me, not the way Derek looked at me with the greedy appreciation of a young man who saw me as a conquest. Not the way Tyler looked at me with the desperate adoration of a boy who saw me as something unattainable and therefore irresistible. I wanted Nathan Reed to look at me the way a collector looks at a rare and valuable object. I wanted him to see me, truly see me, and recognize that I was something worth having. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it exhilarated me. Love, quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. I started dressing differently after that. No more sensible blazers and color-coded blouses. I went shopping on a Saturday afternoon while Oliver was at my mother's house, and I spent $300 on clothes I would never have considered. 6 months earlier, a burgundy blouse that draped across my bust in a way that drew the eye without being obscene, a black pencil skirt that hugged my hips and ended just above the knee, heels that made me walk differently, more slowly, more deliberately, with a hip swing that I practiced in front of my bedroom mirror until it looked natural. I did my makeup differently too, more dramatic, winged eyeliner that extended the shape of my eyes, a bolder lip color, a touch of highlighter on my cheekbones that caught the light and made me look, I thought, admiring my reflection, younger, more vibrant, more alive. The first time I wore my new outfit to work, Derek noticed immediately. He appeared at my desk before I'd even finished logging in, leaning against the partition with a slow smile that said he approved. "Well, well," he said, "someone's looking good today." I smiled. "Just thought I'd try something different." "Different looks good on you," he said. "Though I've always thought so." I thanked him, and he lingered for a moment longer, and then he drifted back to his own desk, and I got to work on my spreadsheets with a little more energy than usual. But Nathan Reed didn't walk past my cubicle that day, or the next, or the one after that. I began to pay attention to his schedule. I learned that he arrived at 8:15 every morning, later than most executives, and took the elevator to the executive floor rather than the main stairs. I learned that he ate lunch at his desk most days, occasionally with other executives, occasionally alone. I learned that he left the building at around 6 p.m. later on days when there were board meetings or important calls. I learned the rhythm of his life, the pattern of his presence, the geography of his days, and I positioned myself accordingly. I started taking my coffee breaks at 10:30, when Nathan typically emerged from his office to refill his cup at the executive kitchen on the 4th floor. I timed my trips to the printer to coincide with his afternoon walks through the building, a habit he'd developed, supposedly for health reasons, but which I suspected was more about demonstrating his presence, his authority, his unobstructed view of his domain. I volunteered for projects that required cross-departmental meetings, knowing that the operations department would be involved and that Nathan sometimes attended those sessions. It was calculate. It was deliberate. It was the most ambitious thing I had ever done in my professional life, and I did it without apology, because here's what I had realized. Competence alone was not going to get me noticed. I had been competent at Meridian Holdings for 8 years. I had received 2 modest promotions and a handful of positive performance reviews, and I had watched less qualified colleagues leapfrog over me into management positions because they had the right connections, the right relationships, the right combination of charm and ambition that made them visible in ways I had never been. I had spent a decade believing that if I just worked hard enough, if I just delivered results, if I just kept my head down and did my job, the universe would eventually recognize my value and reward me accordingly. The universe had other plans, but bodies, I was learning, communicated in ways that spreadsheets never could. Love quiet, forbidden midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. It took 3 weeks before Nathan Reed noticed me. I was in the executive conference room on the 5th floor, presenting a budget analysis to a group of senior managers that included Nathan for the first time. I had prepared meticulously, more meticulously than I had prepared for any presentation in my career. I wore my burgundy blouse and my black pencil skirt and my new heels. I did my makeup with the winged eyeliner and the bold lip. I walked into that conference room like I owned it, like I had every right to be there, like my numbers were not just accurate but revelatory. Nathan sat at the far end of the table, reviewing something on his tablet, barely paying attention as I began to speak. I watched him the way a predator watches prey, not directly, not obviously, but with a peripheral awareness that tracked every shift in his posture, every movement of his eyes. He was distracted for the first 5 minutes, playing with his pen, checking his phone. The kind of behavior you expect from a man who has heard 1,000 budget presentations and found them all equally forgettable. Then I said something unexpected. The proposed allocation for Q3 doesn't align with our actual operational capacity, I said, pausing to let the words land. And if we implement it as outlined, we'll be short approximately $340,000 by November. I've modeled 3 alternative scenarios that address this gap without requiring additional headcount. Nathan looked up. It was a small gesture, a lifting of his eyes from his tablet, a rotation of his head in my direction, but I felt it like an electric shock. For the first time since I had started working at Meridian Holdings, Nathan Reed was looking at me, not through me, not past me, at me. "Go on," he said. His voice was low and even, with a slight rasp that suggested he smoked occasionally or drank more than he should. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed, and hearing it directed at me, at my analysis, at my work, at me made something clench in my lower abdomen. I went on. I presented my 3 scenarios, each one modeled in careful detail, each one with projections that I had verified 3 times because I refused to let a single number be wrong. Nathan didn't interrupt. He watched me throughout, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes tracking me as I moved around the conference table with my laser pointer and my PowerPoint slides and my carefully constructed arguments. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, the kind of silence that happens when a room full of people is waiting to see how the most powerful person in the room will respond. "Fascinating analysis," Nathan said finally. He set down his tablet. "I'd like to see the full model. Can you have it on my desk by end of day?" "Of course," I said. My heart was hammering against my ribs. "I'll send it over personally." He nodded. Then he looked back at his tablet, and the moment was over. But I knew with a certainty that settled into my bones like warm water that something had changed. Nathan Reed had seen me, not my body, me, my mind, my competence, my willingness to challenge assumptions that everyone else had accepted without question. But I also knew, with the same certainty, that he had also seen my body, that the 2 things were inseparable now, that I had become a woman whose mind and whose curves were inextricably linked, and that the path to advancement, professional, personal, all of it ran through both. Love quiet, forbidden, midlife romance? Subscribe to Noah's Awakening for more slow burn stories. I sent Nathan the file at 4:47 p.m. I attached a cover email that was professional in tone but warm enough to suggest personality, the kind of email a man might read twice, wondering what kind of woman had written it. I did not deliver it personally. That would have been too obvious, too eager. Instead, I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and walked to the elevator with the kind of unhurried confidence that I'd been practicing for weeks. Nathan was still in his office when I passed the glass walls of the executive suite. I could see him at his desk, my file open on his screen, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look unexpectedly human. He didn't look up as I passed, but I caught a glimpse of his expression, focused, engaged, the kind of expression a man gets when he is genuinely interested in something. And I felt a surge of triumph so pure it almost made me dizzy. He liked my work. He genuinely liked it, and that, I realized, was the key. Not just the clothes, not just the curves, but the combination, the curves plus the competence, the body plus the brain, the woman who could model a budget and model herself in equal measure. Nathan Reed was a man who valued both, who expected both, who had surrounded himself with beautiful women and intelligent women, and had apparently concluded that the two rarely came together, which was why he had settled for a series of relationships with one or the other, never both. Until now, until me. But getting Nathan to notice me once was not the same as getting him to notice me permanently.